He needed a way to secure the money on his bag.
He vanished into a stormy sky with $200,000 and a parachute, never to be seen again.
This is D.B. Cooper's ticket in the name of Dan Cooper.
For over 50 years, the world has obsessed over one question: who was D.B. Cooper? Now, a hidden parachute, a trail of buried secrets, and the possible involvement of a Vietnam veteran could finally crack the case wide open.
To this day, no one knows what happened to him after he jumped.
The FBI closed the case back in 2016, but might informally look at the piece of evidence that's recently come to light.
Has America's greatest mystery just been solved? Or is this another dead end in a story built on myth and misdirection? What you're about to hear might change everything you thought you knew about the man who hijacked history. On the evening of November 24, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving in the United States, a man in his mid-40s walked into Portland International Airport and bought a one-way ticket to Seattle. He paid in cash and used the name Dan Cooper. Dressed in a dark suit, white shirt, and a black tie, he looked like any other businessman traveling for work. He carried a briefcase and boarded Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, a short 30-minute flight north to Washington State. The man took a seat toward the rear of the aircraft, a Boeing 727. At first, there was nothing unusual about him. He ordered a drink, bourbon and soda, and appeared calm. But what happened next would turn a routine flight into one of the most puzzling and enduring mysteries in American history. Shortly after takeoff, the man handed a note to a flight attendant. Assuming it was just another attempt to flirt, she ignored it. He leaned in and quietly told her, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Inside his briefcase, he showed her a collection of red cylinders and wires that looked convincingly like an explosive device. Whether it was real or not, it was enough to make the crew take him seriously. He then made his demands: $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, and a refueled aircraft ready to fly to Mexico City. If they didn't comply, he implied, there would be consequences. The flight crew relayed the message to air traffic control, who informed the authorities. What followed was one of the most coordinated and unusual ransom deliveries in aviation history. By the time Flight 305 landed in Seattle just after sunset, the FBI had gathered the ransom: $200,000 in used $20 bills, and 4 parachutes, 2 main and 2 reserve. The passengers, unaware of the full situation, were released unharmed. Cooper kept the flight crew on board and instructed the pilots to set a new course: head south, fly low, below 10,000 feet, and keep the speed under 200 knots. One specific instruction stood out: keep the aircraft's rear stairs lowered during flight. This was something only a Boeing 727 could do, and it suggested a level of knowledge not common among civilians. Somewhere over the rugged, rain-drenched forest near the Columbia River between Seattle and Reno, Cooper opened the rear door, stepped onto the lowered stairway, and jumped into the darkness. It was stormy, the visibility was poor, and the terrain below was a mix of mountains, trees, and rivers. The hijacker vanished into the night, along with the money. What came next was one of the largest manhunts in FBI history. Dozens of planes scoured the area in the days that followed. Hundreds of agents, soldiers, and volunteers searched on foot, covering miles of remote and challenging terrain. But no trace of the man or his parachute was ever found. The hijacker had used the alias Dan Cooper, but a miscommunication with the press led to him being referred to as D.B. Cooper, a name that stuck in headlines, books, and eventually pop culture. From that point on, he became a folk legend. The case sparked decades of theories, amateur investigations, and speculation, but hard evidence remained frustratingly elusive. The FBI kept the case open for 45 years. They interviewed over 800 suspects, examined physical evidence, and chased countless leads, but none of it led to a definitive identification. The only physical clue discovered in the years after the jump came in 1980, when an 8-year-old boy digging in the sand along the Columbia River near Vancouver, Washington, uncovered a bundle of rotting $20 bills. The serial numbers matched the ransom money given to Cooper. This discovery, while fascinating, only deepened the mystery. The bills were buried and decayed, suggesting they had been exposed to the elements. But there was still no sign of the man who took them. The FBI's eventual profile of Cooper described him as calm, methodical, and well-prepared. He didn't appear nervous or erratic during the hijacking, and his behavior toward the passengers and crew was never aggressive. Witnesses said he was polite, even reassuring at times. That, perhaps, was part of the public's fascination. He was the rare kind of criminal who committed a high-stakes crime without violence and then disappeared without a trace. Over time, D.B. Cooper became more than just a case. He became a symbol, a mystery man who defied the odds, challenged the system, and got away. The story inspired songs, films, and an entire subculture of amateur sleuths who devoted years of their lives trying to crack the case. Each new theory brought a flurry of excitement, but the trail remained cold. In 2016, the FBI formally closed the investigation. Their statement acknowledged the lack of credible leads and explained that resources needed to be redirected to more pressing matters. Still, they made it clear that if significant new evidence ever surfaced, especially something physical like the parachutes or remaining ransom money, they would re-examine it. Even with the case officially closed, public interest never faded. Over the years, numerous suspects emerged, each with their own plausible backstory. Some were ex-military, others ex-cons. Some had skydiving experience, while others simply bore a resemblance to FBI sketches. None could be conclusively tied to the hijacking. One of the more famous suspects was a man named Kenneth Christensen, a former paratrooper and airline employee. His family claimed he made suspicious comments over the years and had access to Boeing 727s, but again, there was no definitive proof. Another popular theory involved a man named Dwayne Weber, who allegedly confessed to being Cooper on his deathbed. Yet despite exhaustive efforts to link him to the case, investigators found nothing solid. And then in recent years, something changed. A new figure entered the scene, an aviation expert and retired pilot named Dan Grider. He had spent nearly 20 years studying the D.B. Cooper case, analyzing flight patterns, parachute technology, and FBI documents. What he claimed to uncover would reignite interest in the mystery and shift the spotlight toward a long-dismissed suspect whose connection to the case had never been fully explored. But before that story unfolds, it's important to understand what made the original hijacking so unique. It wasn't just about the money or the mystery or the myth that followed. It was the near-perfect execution. Cooper knew the aircraft's capabilities, knew how to manipulate the crew without using violence, and most importantly, he knew exactly when and how to vanish. That level of planning wasn't random. It suggested experience, perhaps military, perhaps aviation, or maybe both. Whoever Cooper was, he wasn't improvising. He had prepared for this moment. And as the decades passed, those closest to the case began to wonder, did he survive the jump? If he did, where did he go? And was it possible that he struck again, just months later, under a different name? In 2023, something unexpected surfaced. Not a witness, not a confession, but a piece of physical evidence. Something tangible, something potentially game-changing. And it came not from the wilderness where Cooper disappeared, but from a far more ordinary place, a family storage unit. Dan Grider, a retired airline captain and aviation analyst, had long held an interest in the D.B. Cooper case. His background as a pilot gave him a technical understanding of aircraft and parachuting logistics that most amateur sleuths didn't possess. Over the years, he'd become a known figure in the small but passionate community of Cooper researchers. He'd spent years combing through documents, studying jump techniques, and dissecting the layout of the Boeing 727 Cooper had jumped from. His fascination went deeper than most. He wanted answers based on data, not guesswork. Then, during what seemed like another routine step in his investigation, Grider made a discovery that could shift everything. The story began with a rumor, one that had circulated among Cooper enthusiasts for years, that a man named Richard Floyd McCoy Jr., a former Vietnam veteran and convicted hijacker, might have been D.B. Cooper. McCoy had pulled off a similar skyjacking just months after Cooper's disappearance. He too had used a parachute, jumped from a Boeing 727, and demanded a ransom, this time double the amount. But the FBI had dismissed McCoy as a suspect early on, citing an alibi for the Thanksgiving weekend in 1971 and a lack of hard evidence connecting him to the first hijacking. Despite the FBI's dismissal, Grider wasn't convinced. His research kept leading him back to McCoy. Then, in the course of investigating McCoy's background, he learned that McCoy's family still owned property in Utah. That's when he approached a storage unit tied to the McCoy family estate. What he found there would send ripples through the decades-old case. Hidden among old personal belongings, boxes of memorabilia, and other stored items was a parachute rig. To most people, it might have looked like just another piece of surplus military gear, aged, dusty, forgotten. But Grider saw it differently. To him, the parachute stood out immediately. It was a military-style rig, highly modified in ways that matched descriptions in old FBI files and forensic reports from the original Cooper investigation. The parachute had alterations that weren't standard issue. Specifically, the ripcord housing had been moved and reinforced. The harness had unusual stitching patterns, and the canopy configuration showed signs of being customized. These details weren't generic. They were the kind of modifications only an experienced jumper or someone with insider knowledge would make. It wasn't just any military rig. It looked like one made specifically for an unconventional jump, just like the one Cooper had made in 1971. Grider filmed his discovery and posted it on his YouTube channel, which was already known for covering aviation topics. The video quickly gained traction. Viewers were intrigued, not only by the find itself, but by the precision with which Grider explained its significance. He pointed out how rare it was for a parachute to remain intact for so many years, and how the storage conditions, cool, dry, and protected, had preserved it well. It wasn't buried in the ground or left exposed to the elements. It had been deliberately kept safe. Even more striking than the parachute itself were the items found alongside it. Among them was a log book, handwritten entries documenting several private parachute jumps. The final entries were dated just before November 1971. Grider believed this detail pointed to a training regimen, possibly in preparation for the hijacking. The jumps stopped abruptly, which raised further questions. Why would someone with that level of dedication to parachuting suddenly stop right before the date of the Cooper heist? The logbook was in Richard McCoy's handwriting, and it was tucked in with other personal items, military memorabilia, photos, and flight manuals. These weren't the possessions of a random collector. They belonged to someone who lived that life, someone who had experience with military aircraft and parachuting, just like Cooper. According to Grider, the condition and placement of the parachute and associated gear strongly suggested intentional preservation. This wasn't the kind of equipment one simply forgets about. It had been stored with care in a way that made it accessible but also hidden from view. It was almost as if it had been quietly waiting to be discovered. Within days of posting his video, Grider was contacted by the FBI. He hadn't reached out to them first, which made the agency's response even more striking. They didn't brush him off, nor did they issue a blanket denial. Instead, they asked to inspect the parachute and related items, on Grider's terms. According to him, they were unusually direct. They said they knew what they were looking for. Grider agreed under the condition that the FBI return the parachute within a week if it didn't meet their criteria. That was over a year ago. As of now, the parachute remains in the FBI's custody. It was taken to their forensic lab in Quantico, Virginia, where analysts are reportedly conducting DNA tests and further analysis. Though the FBI has not publicly commented on the matter, their continued possession of the parachute suggests that they're taking the discovery seriously. For those following the Cooper case, this turn of events was unlike anything that had happened since the 1980 discovery of the decayed ransom money. This wasn't another theory or look-alike suspect. It was a real object tied to a real person matching the known details of the original crime. The parachute itself, with its custom modifications, was a critical piece of the puzzle. In parachuting, especially military jumping, gear is often tailored to the individual. Those changes are like a signature. And the rig found in the McCoy storage unit had features that lined up with descriptions in the FBI's original investigation. That included not only the canopy alterations, but also adjustments made to ensure stability during freefall, something Cooper would have needed, especially when jumping from a commercial aircraft at night in a rainstorm. The significance of the parachute find extended beyond the gear itself. It brought renewed attention to McCoy and reopened questions that many had long stopped asking. Why was his connection to the Cooper case dismissed so quickly? Did he really have a solid alibi, or had the evidence simply not been strong enough back then? And if the FBI now believed there was a link, what did that say about their earlier conclusions? More importantly, it raised a sobering thought. If McCoy was Cooper, then the case wasn't just about a single hijacking. It was about someone who had potentially carried out two nearly identical operations within a few months. That kind of pattern suggested not only planning, but confidence, and perhaps even a deeper motivation that investigators had never fully understood. The parachute discovery added a new layer of depth to a case that many had given up on. For the first time in decades, there was a real possibility that Cooper had left behind something traceable, something that could be tested and verified. The quiet response from the FBI, combined with their swift action, only added to the growing sense that a breakthrough might finally be on the horizon. And so, what had started as a forgotten piece of equipment in a family storage unit became a focal point in the search for one of America's most elusive criminals. The evidence was no longer theoretical. It was real, physical, and now in the hands of the very agency that had once walked away from the case. McCoy's story begins long before the Cooper case, shaped by military service and a reputation for discipline. Born in North Carolina in 1942, he went on to serve 2 tours in Vietnam, where he earned several commendations, including a Purple Heart. McCoy wasn't just a soldier. He was an accomplished helicopter pilot, a paratrooper, and later, a part-time police officer in Utah. He also attended Brigham Young University, where he studied law enforcement. By all appearances, McCoy was a model citizen, a devout Mormon, and a family man. But beneath the surface, there may have been something more complex at play. Just 5 months after D.B. Cooper's legendary jump on April 7, 1972, an eerily similar hijacking took place. A man boarded United Airlines Flight 855, flying from Newark to Los Angeles. He used an alias, carried a fake grenade and pistol, and once again demanded a ransom, this time $500,000. He requested 4 parachutes and ordered the plane to fly low and slow, mirroring the instructions Cooper had given. This hijacker, like Cooper, leapt from the rear stairs of a Boeing 727 somewhere over Utah. Unlike the Cooper case, however, this one didn't stay unsolved for long. McCoy was identified and arrested just days later, thanks to a tip from a Utah State Highway Patrol officer who recognized him from a police sketch. When law enforcement searched McCoy's home, they found a jumpsuit, a duffel bag of cash, and the handwritten hijacking note he had given the flight crew. The similarities between the 2 hijackings were so striking that many immediately wondered, had D.B. Cooper struck again? McCoy was convicted and sentenced to 45 years in prison, but in 1974, he managed to escape by carving a fake pistol out of dental paste and hijacking a garbage truck. His freedom didn't last long. He was tracked down months later and killed in a shootout with FBI agents in Virginia. It was a dramatic end to a short and chaotic chapter in his life, but it left a lingering question. Was McCoy the same man who had hijacked Flight 3055 months earlier? The FBI didn't think so, at least not officially. They insisted that McCoy had a solid alibi for the night of the Cooper hijacking. He was reportedly at home in Utah with his wife and children for the Thanksgiving holiday. At the time, there was no physical evidence tying him to the first hijacking, and the investigation moved on. But some investigators, both official and amateur, were never fully convinced. One of the leading voices keeping McCoy's connection to the Cooper case alive in recent years has been Dan Grider, the retired pilot who unearthed the modified parachute in 2023. For Grider, the parachute find didn't just point to D.B. Cooper. It pointed specifically to McCoy. The modifications to the rig matched those expected of someone with McCoy's background and military training. The gear had been stored carefully, and it was found alongside other deeply personal items, including McCoy's parachute logbook. That logbook turned out to be another potential clue. It contained entries that showed McCoy had performed a series of private freefall practice jumps in the months leading up to the Cooper hijacking. Then, just before November 1971, the entries stopped. They picked up again shortly before the April 1972 hijacking. The pause in activity was suspicious. It suggested a deliberate gap in training, perhaps in preparation for something more than practice. To many, this detail felt too deliberate to ignore. McCoy had both the skills and the experience to pull off such an operation. He was a seasoned jumper, trained in military and civilian parachuting, and he knew how to plan a jump with precision. He also had a clear understanding of aviation, something Cooper seemed to demonstrate through his knowledge of the Boeing 727's unique features, such as the rear stair system. The FBI had long believed Cooper must have had specialized knowledge. The demand to fly at low altitude, under 10,000 feet, and with the rear stairs deployed, wasn't something an ordinary person would request. Those specific instructions showed that Cooper not only knew the aircraft but understood the dynamics of jumping from it safely. McCoy, as it turned out, fit that profile perfectly. In addition to the parachute and logbook, Grider also pointed to the behavior of McCoy's family over the years. According to him, McCoy's children were reluctant to speak about their father. When Grider first attempted to contact them, they declined to comment. Only after the deaths of both their mother, Karen McCoy, and grandmother did they begin to open up, though cautiously. Karen McCoy's potential role in the hijackings adds another layer to the theory. She was never charged, but some believe she may have been involved in planning or covering up both crimes. In the 1972 case, she was suspected of having assisted her husband with logistics, though no charges were ever brought against her. If she had played a role in the 1972 hijacking, it stood to reason that she might have been involved in the earlier one as well. Grider claims that McCoy's children quietly acknowledged that they had long suspected their father was D.B. Cooper. Growing up, they had lived under strict instructions to never talk about what their parents might have done. One of the children allegedly described the experience as a prison without walls, the burden of knowing something world-changing, but not being able to say anything. To Grider, this emotional weight carried by the family was as revealing as any physical clue. It spoke to a deeper truth, one that had been buried for decades. The idea that the Cooper mystery wasn't just a public legend but a private secret guarded by an entire family began to take shape. As for why McCoy would attempt a second hijacking after successfully vanishing the first time, several theories exist. Some believe he may have lost or damaged the original ransom money during his jump. The decayed bills found in 1980, buried along the Columbia River, support the theory that at least some of the cash was never recovered. If that was the case, McCoy might have attempted a second heist to replace what was lost. Others suggest ego might have played a role. Having gotten away with one of the boldest crimes in modern history, perhaps he wanted to see if he could do it again, maybe even prove that the first time wasn't a fluke, or it may have simply been about the money. The second hijacking demanded a larger ransom, which could point to financial need or growing confidence in his ability to escape justice. Whatever the motive, the second hijacking was a mistake. McCoy was caught, and though he managed to escape briefly, his story ended in violence. But if he was D.B. Cooper, it also means he pulled off not one, but two skyjackings with military precision, and nearly got away with both. Grider and others argue that the weight of circumstantial evidence is now stronger than ever. The parachute rig, the jump log, McCoy's known skills, the timing of his training, and the emotional silence of his family all point to a man who could very well have been Cooper. The FBI may have dismissed the theory decades ago, but new findings are forcing a re-evaluation. And if McCoy was indeed D.B. Cooper, the story changes dramatically. The legend of the calm, mysterious man who vanished without a trace becomes the story of a decorated war veteran, a husband, a father, and a man who gambled everything twice. Despite its high-profile status, the investigation ran into repeated dead ends. Hundreds of suspects were interviewed, and a wide range of forensic methods were employed over the years. Some suspects matched the sketch, others had suspicious military or aviation backgrounds. Yet no solid physical evidence ever emerged to tie anyone definitively to the crime. By 2016, the FBI announced it was closing the case. Their statement acknowledged the exhaustive nature of the search and the sheer volume of leads they had pursued, over 1,000 by their count. But none of them produced definitive results. The statement included a final message to the public. Unless someone could come forward with significant new physical evidence, especially something directly connected to the parachutes or ransom money, they would not be reopening the case. For many, that felt like the final chapter. But it wasn't. Years later, when aviation expert Dan Grider came forward with what he believed was the actual parachute used in the 1971 hijacking, the FBI's 2016 message suddenly became relevant again. The parachute discovered among the belongings of Richard Floyd McCoy Jr.'s family was not just a curious piece of gear, it was a highly modified military rig that appeared to match specific characteristics outlined in old FBI case files. The discovery, as it turned out, may have been exactly what the agency had said it needed in order to reconsider the case. What caught people off guard wasn't just the item itself, but how quickly the FBI responded. Grider had never reached out to the agency. He had simply posted a video about the parachute on his YouTube channel, sharing what he had found and explaining why he believed it could be connected to the Cooper case. Just days after the video went live, the FBI contacted him. According to Grider, the interaction was direct and serious. The agents didn't question whether the parachute was worth examining. They told him that they knew what they were looking for and requested to inspect the equipment under his terms. Grider agreed on the condition that if the parachute wasn't of interest, it would be returned within a week. That was more than a year ago. Since then, neither the parachute nor the associated logbooks and artifacts have been returned. The items were reportedly transported to the FBI's forensic laboratory in Quantico, Virginia. There, the focus shifted from field investigation to detailed forensic analysis. At the heart of this new inquiry is one element that the FBI had always hoped for but never previously obtained in relation to Cooper: DNA. Back in the early 2000s, the FBI examined a piece of evidence left behind on the plane, a black clip-on tie believed to have been worn by the hijacker. Using the technology available at the time, they managed to extract partial DNA samples. The sample was degraded and incomplete, but it remained in the agency's archives. Now, more than 50 years later, advances in forensic science have made it possible to do much more with limited biological material. One method is called genetic triangulation, using the DNA of living relatives to potentially match the profile of an unidentified suspect. In this case, if the FBI could obtain DNA from McCoy's children and compare it to the DNA collected from the tie, it might provide the evidence needed to confirm or rule out McCoy as D.B. Cooper. Dan Grider believes this is exactly what the FBI is now trying to do. While the agency has made no public statement confirming this, the circumstances suggest an ongoing effort behind the scenes. Holding onto the parachute and associated evidence for over a year without comment is not typical unless an active analysis is underway. Adding to the intrigue is the fact that the FBI has historically been tight-lipped about ongoing investigations, particularly those that involve unresolved or high-profile cases. In previous public appearances, such as interviews and press briefings, the FBI maintained a neutral stance, always cautious not to reveal too much or give false hope. Their silence now, in the face of such a potentially important discovery, only fuels speculation. Grider has said that the agency's interest in the parachute wasn't casual. According to him, when agents first contacted him, they wanted to know exactly where the rig had been found, how it had been stored, and who had had access to it over the years. These are not the kinds of questions asked about an irrelevant item. They are the kinds of questions asked when preparing for forensic verification. It is believed that the parachute and the logbook, both stored securely for decades in the McCoy family's possession, are now being analyzed for potential DNA evidence, as well as other forensic clues like fabric threads, hair, skin cells, or environmental residue that could link them to the hijacking or the suspect. In addition to DNA, handwriting analysis is also thought to be part of the investigation. The handwritten logbook found with the parachute contains entries documenting multiple freefall jumps. If experts can conclusively tie that handwriting to Richard McCoy, it may further strengthen the circumstantial case. What makes this situation particularly compelling is that it's not just a theory anymore. It's not another speculation based on a suspect's vague resemblance or anecdotal confessions. For the first time in decades, there is physical evidence undergoing analysis, and that has changed the nature of the case. However, this also raises important questions about procedure and accountability. If the FBI confirms that the DNA from the tie matches that of McCoy's family, would they reopen the case publicly? Would they issue a statement officially declaring the case closed and naming McCoy as D.B. Cooper? Or would they keep their findings internal, acknowledging the result only quietly? Some legal experts argue that given the public nature of the case and its impact on American culture, a formal statement would be appropriate, even necessary. Others suggest the Bureau might avoid definitive public comments unless the evidence is absolutely conclusive and supported by more than just DNA. For the broader public and true crime community, the possibility of closure brings mixed emotions. On one hand, the idea of finally solving the mystery is exciting. It would answer one of the most enduring questions in American criminal lore. On the other hand, it would also mean the end of a legend, a mystery that has fascinated people for generations. Some fans of the case have even said they hope it remains unsolved, simply because it's become more than a crime. It's become a myth, a story that people love to revisit and debate. But if the DNA analysis confirms what Grider's research strongly suggests, then the narrative around D.B. Cooper will need to change. He may not have been the smooth, enigmatic figure many imagined. Instead, he may have been Richard Floyd McCoy Jr., a decorated Vietnam veteran, a father of two, and a man who risked everything not once, but twice. For now, the FBI isn't saying. Grider continues to push for answers, stating that this isn't about fame or recognition, it's about truth. He believes the evidence is too strong to ignore, and he wants to see the case resolved in his lifetime. As the materials sit in the Quantico lab, perhaps in a freezer, perhaps on an examination table, the answer could be closer than ever. After more than 50 years of speculation, books, films, and amateur sleuthing, the final piece of the puzzle may not come from a theory or confession, but from a strand of DNA and a forgotten parachute kept hidden in a grandmother's storage room. When Dan Grider released his video detailing the discovery of the parachute and linking it to Richard Floyd McCoy Jr., the internet responded quickly. Viewers from all walks of life, including true crime fans, aviation enthusiasts, and amateur detectives, began poring over the evidence. Forums filled with new theories. Social media timelines became flooded with clips, reactions, and comparisons. The idea that one of America's most notorious unsolved cases might finally be coming to a close was both thrilling and unsettling. For many, the appeal of the D.B. Cooper case was its perfect balance of danger and elegance. The image of a calm man in a dark suit, politely making demands, then leaping out of a plane into a stormy night with a bag full of money, had captured the imagination of people across the world. It was the kind of story that sounded like it came straight from a novel or a Hollywood film. Cooper never hurt anyone, at least not directly. He was careful, composed, and completely anonymous. That anonymity gave rise to an entire subculture around the case. There have been documentaries, books, podcasts, and even themed events. Each year in Washington state, Cooper-themed festivals bring together people who celebrate the mystery, not just the man. They dress like the hijacker, share theories, and hunt for clues in the forests along the Columbia River. For these communities, Cooper is not just a criminal, he's a legend. But when Grider's findings pointed to Richard McCoy, a man with a documented criminal past, a history of violence, and a failed second hijacking attempt, it complicated the story. McCoy wasn't a shadowy stranger. He was a real person with a family, a military record, and a known identity. He had already been arrested and killed in a shootout with the FBI. The mystery for many began to shift from something mythic to something real and in some ways tragic. The reaction from the public was mixed. Some welcomed the idea of closure. They appreciated the work Grider had done, recognizing the years of research, travel, and analysis that had led to the parachute discovery. They saw the potential DNA testing and the cooperation from McCoy's surviving children as positive steps toward finally solving the case. Others were more hesitant. They worried that assigning the identity of D.B. Cooper to McCoy might strip away the mystery, turning an intriguing tale into just another solved crime. For those who had followed the case for decades, it was never just about the facts. It was about the wonder, the possibility that someone could vanish completely, pull off the perfect escape, and live out the rest of their life undetected. That romanticism was harder to reconcile with the reality of a man like McCoy, who was caught within days of his second hijacking and died violently soon after. Even within law enforcement circles, opinions remained divided. While some former investigators acknowledged that McCoy was always a strong candidate, others cautioned that circumstantial evidence, even compelling evidence, is not the same as definitive proof. Until a direct DNA match is made and officially confirmed by the FBI, the mystery is not considered closed. The agency's silence since retrieving the parachute only adds to the tension. While it may be a sign of an ongoing forensic process, it also leaves room for doubt and speculation. Still, the weight of the evidence continues to grow. The modified parachute, the jump log book, and the personal items linked to McCoy provide a level of detail not previously available in any other theory. The fact that McCoy carried out a nearly identical hijacking just months after the Cooper incident raises serious questions about coincidence versus planning. The logistics of the two crimes are so similar that the odds of them being unconnected appear increasingly slim. Grider, for his part, has remained consistent. He says he is not pursuing fame or attention, only the truth. He has spent more than 20 years investigating the Cooper case, following the evidence wherever it leads. His work has gone beyond simple curiosity. He has invested time, money, and professional expertise into finding answers. Now, with the parachute and related materials in the hands of the FBI, he believes those answers may finally be within reach. If the DNA tests confirm a link between McCoy and the material left behind on Flight 305, it would mark the end of the only unsolved skyjacking in U.S. history. But that confirmation would also raise deeper questions about why the case went unsolved for so long. McCoy was a suspect early on. He had the skill set, the motive, and even the criminal history. But the FBI ruled him out based on an alibi that now appears far less secure. If McCoy was Cooper, it would suggest that the most famous fugitive in aviation history was nearly caught before the legend had even taken hold. It would also shift the story's tone. D.B. Cooper would no longer be an unknown rebel figure. He would be a former soldier who tried the same crime twice. The second time, he failed. He was caught, escaped, and then died in a shootout. That's not the clean, romantic ending many people have imagined over the years. It's messy, violent, and filled with consequences. For McCoy's family, the possibility of closure is even more complex. They've lived with rumors and suspicions for decades. According to Grider, they were bound by a silence that stretched across generations. If McCoy was Cooper, it means his children grew up under the weight of a secret they could never speak aloud. Now, with both their mother and grandmother gone, they may feel freer to engage, but the emotional burden hasn't disappeared. For them, it's not just a story about a mysterious hijacker. It's about their father, their past, and a legacy they never chose. In the wider public, interest in the case shows no signs of slowing down. New documentaries are already in production. Podcasts continue to explore every detail of Grider's findings. Online communities remain active, sharing news, analyzing statements, and waiting for official word from the FBI. But perhaps what makes this latest development most significant is that it feels like the end of an era. If McCoy is confirmed as D.B. Cooper, then one of the most iconic mysteries in modern history will have a name and a face. It will have a beginning, middle, and end. And that, for many, is both satisfying and bittersweet. The legacy of D.B. Cooper is not just about a man who escaped into the night. It's about how the story endured. It's about how people filled in the blanks with their own imaginations, and how a single event in 1971 became a cultural touchstone. From criminal folklore to aviation history, the Cooper case touched a nerve that continues to resonate more than 50 years later. As of now, we wait. The evidence is with the FBI. The DNA tests, if they're being conducted, may take time. But for the first time in decades, those following the case can sense that something has shifted. This isn't just another theory, it's not speculation, it's real physical evidence in the hands of those with the power to make a final determination. Whether the FBI chooses to confirm or remain silent, whether they reopen the case or close it behind closed doors, the world may never see D.B. Cooper in quite the same way again. If the man behind the alias truly was Richard Floyd McCoy Jr., then the mystery doesn't vanish. It simply changes shape. From myth to memory, from unsolved puzzle to historical fact. And perhaps after all this time, that's what the story was always heading toward. Not a man jumping into the night, but the truth finally landing.